Welcome to the recorded version of Support for the Working Family Caregiver, part of the Family Caregiver Support webinar series brought to you by the American Society on Aging and a generous sponsorship from Home Instead Senior Care. Okay, our presenter today is Lakeland Hogan. Lakeland is a gerontologist and caregiver advocate for Home Instead Senior Care. Lakeland works to educate professionals, families, and communities on issues older adults face. She is a doctoral candidate at the University of Nebraska, Omaha, where she is studying social gerontology. She has a Master of Arts in Social Gerontology and Masters in Business Administration from UNO. Lakeland has professional experience in the private and public sectors of senior care services. She has worked on special projects for UNO's Department of Gerontology and the local area agency on aging. Lakeland serves as Vice President of the Board of Directors for the Dreamweaver Foundation and is active in the Alzheimer's Association's Walk to End Alzheimer's. Lakeland has a passion for helping others, especially aging adults and their families. And with that, I would like to turn the presentation over to Lakeland Hogan. Thanks for being here with us again, Lakeland.
Thanks so much, Steve. Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you to today's webinar. We're going to be talking about caregivers in the workplace. And many Americans are challenged with work-life balance in general. And the life side of that balance may include caregiving for your own children, spending time with a spouse, engaging in leisure activities or hobbies, but more and more people are adding caring for an aging parent or loved one to that list. And so this responsibility can cause some additional stressors on a person's time and energy. It can also bring about unexpected needs for time off from work or modifications to a person's work schedule. So while these types of requests seem to be acceptable for parents of young children, employees do not feel as comfortable making the same request for an aging family member. So in today's webinar, we're going to dive deeper into this topic. And while many of you are working with family caregivers in your daily jobs, you might also find this helpful if you yourself are a family caregiver and also an employee. So I'm going to provide lots of tools and resources for employees, for employers, and help us gain a better understanding of these working family caregivers and what all of that entails. So I want to get us started by looking at today's objectives. By the end of this webinar, my hope is that you'll be able to understand the prevalence of caregivers in the workforce, recognize various demands of the working family caregiver. Then we'll talk about some strategies to help support that work-life balance, and then help discover tools for employers and employees when it comes to caregivers in the workplace. So let's start out by understanding the prevalence of caregivers in the workforce, and I feel like we always start with talking about the age wave because that is significantly impacting caregivers in the U.S. And I'm sure you're very well aware of this age wave that's ramping up in the U.S., which will have a significant impact for the aging field, especially caregiving. And there's a great study that's done by the National Alliance for Caregiving and AARP. It's entitled Caregiving in the U.S., and this study in 2015 revealed that there was approximately 34.2 million Americans that were providing unpaid care to an adult aged 50 or older in the prior 12 months. And that's a really significant number of caregivers, and that number is expected to grow. So on the screen, it's a little hard to read, I apologize, but that top graph, you can see, and this information comes from the U.S. Census Bureau, it's the number of people age 65 plus in the U.S. over a span of time. And as you can see, it will steadily increase through the year 2050. And then the bottom graph shows that the age wave, how the age wave will look in terms of the total percentage of the population that will be 65 and older over the next 20, 30 years or so. So as you can see, this percentage is increasing as well. And you might ask yourself, why is this important? Why is this percentage of the population significant? Well, data from the Value of Home Care report states that 70% of those age 65 will need assistance at some point. And then 40% of those individuals will need daily assistance. So with the percentage of population over the age 65 growing, there will be less people to care for that aging population. And oftentimes the first line of defense for care is the family caregiver. They're the ones that are shouldering the heaviest burdens when it comes to care. So we see a significant impact not only now in terms of the number of caregivers that are out there that are working in addition to their caregiving role, but that number is only going to increase. And these caregivers are trying to balance the demands of their job, their own children or grandchildren, and their aging loved ones. These family caregivers are facing tough choices, and they're dealing with care that they very well might not be equipped to provide to their loved one. Many do not know who to turn to, where to go for support, what their employers will think about their situations as a caregiver, and ultimately some are forced to decide between their family caregiving role and their jobs. And in addition, caregiving can be incredibly isolating, lonely, and a really scary experience for someone who's not been through it before. And in our experience as professionals in the aging and healthcare field, we see these daily struggles of the caregiver. And when you combine that, with the growing demographics of 65 plus, we know that this is just the beginning of these caregiving struggles. And the impact that we're feeling now is pretty minuscule compared to what we'll be experiencing in the coming 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So when we talk about family caregivers in the workforce, we need to keep in mind as employers, as fellow employees, that you will likely have a family caregiver that is your coworker or that is your employee or that you work with in your daily roles. We need to be considerate of that. And so let's talk about that caregiving role or working family caregiver role in a little bit more detail. Research tells us that at any given point, about 17% of all employees are providing care to an older adult. And that's pretty significant when you think about it. We also see that working women are disproportionately affected by the responsibilities of caregiving for an aging loved one, as about 2/3 of all family caregivers are females. The Caregiving in the U.S. study also gives an idea of who the average caregiver is. So they discovered that the average caregiver is about 49 years old and is a female who works outside of the home and also spends nearly 20 hours a week providing care, unpaid care, to typically a mother, and that care will take place for about 5 years. So when you think about 20 hours of care per week, that's pretty much a part-time job in addition to that full-time job that this caregiver is holding. And over the years, society as a whole, we have made a great deal of progress in supporting working mothers. We've expanded our policies and benefit programs to ease the challenges of child rearing while balancing a career. However, we've not made those same strides for our family caregivers who are supporting their aging loved ones. And while not every working woman is a mother, every working woman is a daughter. So I'm going to say that again because when you pause to think about it, that's significant. While not every working woman is a mother, every working woman is a daughter. So again, these instances, this percentage, 17% of employees providing care to an older adult, that number is going to continue to grow. And Home Instead Senior Care, we actually did a study surveying working family caregivers because we wanted to better understand what they're going through. And I want to share with you what we learned on the next slide. So our survey indicated that people were primarily caring for their mother or their father, and that they were the sole or primary caregiver. And primary caregiver could also be thought of as kind of the lead caregiver. They might have other people in their family that are helping out, but they're the one that really steps up and takes charge, maybe delegates different roles. That's what we refer to when we refer to primary caregiver. And 78% of these working family caregivers, they reported receiving some sort of support in their caregiving tasks. Well, and we didn't really drill down to what exactly that support is, but that is encouraging. 78% do feel supported in some way. But our results also showed that caregiving puts strain on multiple aspects of their life. And as you can see here on the slide, 83% rated or indicated that their ability to manage their work-life balance is challenged by their caregiving role. 81% are having issues with their mental health, 74% with the physical aspects of caregiving. 65% have said it's impacted their career. I hear stories of caregivers having to pass up promotions or having to cut back to part-time. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And it's really impacting their career as a result of their caregiving role. And then 60% indicate that it's taking a hit on their finances. It's really impacting them, challenging them in that way. And furthermore, 26% of those that we surveyed felt that there is a workplace stigma associated with caring for an older adult loved one. 26%. So let's talk a little bit more about that stigma here on this next slide. Family caregiving, we find, is oftentimes the best kept secret in the workplace. People have trouble a lot of times self-identifying as a family caregiver. This means that a person might see themselves just as a son or a daughter that's helping out their mom or their dad or their aging aunt or uncle. They don't really give themselves the label of a caregiver, so that, again, they don't self-identify with that role. And this results in some barriers to understanding the full scope of caregiving in the workplace and caregiving in general, for that matter. So when it comes to the stigma of caregiving, unlike child care, elder care isn't really celebrated in the workplace. And there's also a lack of awareness in some organizations. In many cases, managers aren't aware that their employees are caregiving for an older loved one. Employees avoid drawing attention, or employees themselves, they don't want to draw attention to the fact that they're maybe taking a long lunch to take their mom to a doctor's appointment, or they're missing work to deal with dad's recent fall and hospitalization. And I heard a caregiver explain it to me once in this particular way, so I wanted to share this with you. This person said, when you take time off of work because your child is sick, you're in the custody of that child, and you feel more comfortable talking to your coworkers about it, talking to them about how your child is sick. However, when you're taking time off work to help your aging loved one deal with maybe a fall or cognitive impairment, you don't feel as comfortable discussing your parent or your loved one's situation because you feel like it's not your place. So it's a little bit different when you're caring for a child versus caring for an aging parent. However, it really is the awareness about these caregiving issues that can help us reduce the stigma associated with it. Awareness will help employees feel more comfortable opening up about their situation in the workplace, and it'll also help policymakers and employers make progress to better supporting these family caregivers. And a few slides back, I did mention that women are disproportionately affected by the caregiving role. So I did want to take a little bit of time to talk more about these adult daughters so we can get a better understanding of all the different roles and struggles, stresses that they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. So if you look at the adult daughter profile, adult daughters are typically in midlife. I mentioned that the average age is 49 years old. And this should be a time of zest, personal and professional growth. Perhaps their kids are in middle school, high school. Maybe they're becoming empty nesters for the first time. Maybe they're even becoming grandparents for the first time. They're saving towards retirement at the height of their careers. Really, this should be a time when they are able to enjoy all of those different things. But the reality of the caregiving role for an older adult family member is that there are some certain stresses that come along with it. We've already talked a little bit about the emotional, financial, the physical stressors of caregiving. And caring for an older adult family member, again, might cause a change in the course of their own development. Maybe they're passing up that promotion, or they're not able to pursue a master's or a doctoral degree because they have to take time away from that for caregiving. And it can also cause interpersonal family dynamics. And these family dynamics can be the result of this adult daughter being caught between the competing demands in her life. So these roles would include mother, wife, employee, caregiver. And all of these different roles are causing different stressors. They're pulling this caregiver in different directions. So if we look a little bit deeper at each of these roles, we can see where the stressors might start to affect the adult daughter caregiver. So within each role, there are stressors that can create these points of conflict. So in this individual's role as a wife, and you could really kind of substitute husband or sibling into these different categories to make it a little more relevant to all caregivers. But for this example of an adult daughter, in the wife role, she might lack companionship and emotional support from her spouse or her husband. Maybe there might be poor communication or conflict about their children. Those could be stressors in that role. As a mother, she may have heavy demands of the responsibilities for her children or grandchildren. Maybe she is getting into arguments with her kids because she's spending time caring for a parent or an aging loved one. And then there's uncertainties, stressful uncertainties that come about when you're raising a child. So those can cause stressors. And then the financial burden. Raising children, we know, isn't cheap always. So that can put another stress on this individual. And then when you look at parent care, we know that there's some interpersonal conflict when sometimes the parent that's receiving the care isn't always the most agreeable. Maybe they criticize or complain the care that's being provided by this adult daughter. Maybe they're unresponsive or overly demanding or uncooperative. This adult daughter's trying her best and she's being met with resistance by her aging loved one. So these different roles, these different stressors are really competing for this individual's time and energy. And there really are two sociological perspectives that help to explain these stressors in these roles. So I wanted to just talk briefly about these different sociological perspectives. So we look at really two opposing perspectives here. We're going to look at the competing demands hypothesis and the expansion hypothesis. And evidence really exists for both of these perspectives. And I know that I've been, again, talking in depth about the adult daughter caregiver, but these perspectives can really apply to caregivers more broadly as they're juggling the different roles in their lives. So I'm going to start by just talking about competing demands hypothesis. And the competing demands hypothesis really looks at the negative impacts of caregiving, and it can have a negative impact both on the psychological and physical well-being of the individual. And this also ties in with the scarcity hypothesis. So we know that we all live in a very fast-paced society, and we feel the effects of the scarcity hypothesis at times, which states that individuals have limited personal resources and social organization. So what this boils down to is, as you know, anyone in our society, we have a limited amount of time and resources, a limited amount of energy, and all the different roles and responsibilities in our lives can make conflict inevitable. So while there is this kind of negative competing demands perspective when it comes to caregiving, there is a positive perspective, and that can be explained by the expansion hypothesis. So this expansion hypothesis predicts that caregivers can experience positive consequences of their caregiving roles. Their caregiving can contribute to psychological well-being regardless of the amount of stress that is occurring in each role. So these positive consequences of caregiving could be mastery, self-esteem, identity, social and material gains. So again, when we talk about these family caregivers and we're trying to understand where they're coming from as an employer or a fellow employee or a professional out in the field, we need to realize that there are some negative aspects of caregiving, but there are also some positive aspects of caregiving, the positive consequences as they're referred to in the field. So again, if we refer back to our example of the adult daughter, we can look at how these positive consequences can kind of fall into each of these roles. So the positive consequences or rewards of parent care include, knowing that the parent is well cared for. They feel in their role as a caregiver, they're able to fulfill family obligations, and they're able to spend more time with their parent as a result of their needed assistance. So while the role is overwhelming sometimes and stressful, they can find positive rewards in knowing that their parent, again, is well cared for. And then the positive consequences has also been seen in the other roles. And for a mother, that could be their children bringing purpose and meaning to their lives, making them feel needed and loved. And then the wife role, some positive consequences could include knowing that her husband or partner is being a good spouse to their children. Also, that the husband or spouse is providing support and companionship. And we find that caregivers can actually draw on the resources from one role to compensate for another role. So, for instance, if the parent care is becoming a stressful role, they can draw on their mother and wife role, the love that they feel for their children, the support that they're receiving from their spouse to kind of combat the stresses of another role. And we have found in some studies that the more roles occupied, the better sense of well-being a caregiver can experience. So while caregivers are being overwhelmed by these situations, there can be positive outcomes. So that's something that we need to keep in mind as working with caregivers and encourage them by pointing out these positive consequences. Because sometimes you're so far into it that sometimes it's hard to see, the positive impact that they're making in their caregiving role. And they are so important and vital in the lives of the older adult that they're serving. And as a society as a whole, we need these family caregivers to help provide this support and care because, and this could be a whole other topic, but there aren't going to be enough healthcare professionals and senior care professionals in the world in the coming decades to meet all the needs. So we do need these family caregivers. So we need to be supporting them, especially in the workplace. And that's one role that I haven't really gone over yet in terms of the roles that can have positive and negative consequences. So let's take a little bit closer of a look at that paid employment role, that employee role that a caregiver might be experiencing. So many caregivers find that in their role as an employee, while also being a caregiver, they are having to make workplace accommodations for their aging loved ones. So again, that competing demands theory, their caregiving role is demanding their time, so is their, obviously, employment role, in addition to the other roles that they might also be fulfilling. And caregivers report workplace conflicts such as rearranging their work schedules, working fewer hours or cutting back to part-time, or even taking time off work without pay to meet the needs of their caregiving role. Caregivers might also feel that they do not have enough time and energy, which can be very emotionally draining. Social environments can also impact the caregiver's ability to juggle their roles. And for an example for this particular point, this could be a boss who is not supportive or sensitive to the caregiving role, or a workplace environment that's not supportive of taking time off or rearranging schedules to meet the needs of their caregiving role. Another way we see this competing demands theory play out is that spillover can occur when work interferes with caregiving. Maybe it limits the time and attention that the employee can pay to parent care. And then the caregiving can also interfere with work. And I've talked about this a little bit already. They're exhausted. They're unable to concentrate. And there is a term for this, actually. It's called presenteeism, where an employee is physically at work, but emotionally their mind is somewhere else, thinking about their caregiving role. And that presenteeism could also apply to just about any mother, or if you're having a stressful life event happening, you could also be experiencing this presenteeism. Or, every so often on a Monday, you're physically there, but you're mentally not so much. But for caregivers, we see this presenteeism happening more frequently. But again, the good news, there's always that kind of silver lining, is that for some caregivers, their work can actually act as a buffer to the stresses of parent care. So studies have found that if an individual has a satisfying job and they have full-time employment, that those can be some buffers to those stressors. Sometimes caregivers express, I really do like going to work because it's my designated time where I'm away from that caregiving role and I'm able to kind of get my mind off of it. So those are some ways that the paid caregiving role can cause some stressors for the individual, but also, again, some some positive aspects there in that last bullet. And I know we've been discussing throughout today's presentation about how working family caregivers are mostly women, as women, again, are disproportionately affected by the caregiving role. And Home Instead Senior Care recognized the need to highlight this topic and did so through their recent public education campaign called Daughters in the Workplace. And this program, the goal was to inform businesses about the impact that caregiving is having on their employees, and also to empower caregivers in the workplace with tools and resources so that they can continue to maintain that work-life balance. So for the remainder of this presentation, I'm going to be highlighting some of the information from the Daughters in the Workplace program, and I think that employers and employees both will find these to be helpful. So I know we talked a lot about the caregiver themselves, but I want to take a step back now and look at the bigger picture of how working family caregivers impact businesses as a whole. So overall, caregiving really does impact the bottom line for businesses, and it's to the tune of about $34 billion annually in productivity loss. That is an enormous amount of money. And the reasons why we're seeing this loss in productivity is really those 5 things listed there on the screen. So I'm going to go through them kind of one by one. So first is that increased absenteeism. Unexpected caregiving emergencies could pull the employee away from work at the last minute. And when it comes to the ways that employers can prevent this, a lot of employers, or I should say a handful of employers, are moving to more of a flexible scheduling, or caregivers are seeking out jobs that have the flexible scheduling as an available benefit. And studies show that flex time can have a significant effect on various work-related outcomes, and absenteeism is the largest change in what the studies are finding. Another impact that working family caregivers have on businesses is decreased productivity or loss of productivity. And it might seem easy to connect the decreased productivity with the increasing demands on an employee, but many employees themselves admit that caring for an elderly loved one and the accompanying fatigue and stress really does impact their productivity on the job. So again, that flex time option, if employers can offer that, it can really help with this issue. And then third is a loss of talent. Retaining employees is the top reason that many employers are implementing employee and family assistance incentives. Many employers already recognize the problems that they'll face when they're unable to retain valuable talent as a result of workplace inflexibility. So we know that turnover is very costly to employers. So if they can provide assistance and support for, mothers, working family caregivers, it can hopefully help them retain those employees. Another impact of caregiving is that it can interrupt the flow at work or the services being provided. And there's really no predictability in caregiving for an older adult family member. We've all heard the stories of, one fall could lead to a broken hip, which could kind of spiral into all sorts of caregiving needs that the older adult has, and so the family has to step up. So again, it's really hard to predict what all the family caregiver will need, or all of the care that the caregiver will need to provide. And it could range from, these potential emergencies from falls to heart attacks to medication management. And again, this could really wreak some havoc in the workplace if employers and employees are not prepared to deal with these types of situations. So employers have actually found success in working out a plan in advance with their employees that works for the company and for the employee's job duties. And many companies are ensuring that their employees are cross-trained to minimize the impact of caregiving emergencies. When one employee has to step out, there's another employee that knows enough about that person's job to keep normal business flowing smoothly. And then finally, we have declining morale. Morale can be a difficult issue to pinpoint within companies, but one conflict that could really influence, but it's one area that can really influence business. And if a workplace is not sensitive to the issues of working family caregivers, it could really impact the overall company morale. And again, it could lead to loss of talent, decreased productivity, and all those other things. So when employers are considering adopting some more caregiver-friendly business practices, these are some things to keep in mind. It can really help reduce all of these different areas and hopefully, ultimately, reduce the impact that it's having on their bottom line. So we've talked about how this caregiving is impacting businesses, but let's talk more about the wants and the needs of these working family caregivers. So employers are becoming more and more sensitive to these family caregiving needs. You might have seen on the news lately, businesses like Deloitte are speaking out about their FMLA practice or policies, those types of things. So it is gaining a little more traction in today's society. But when we talk about what caregivers actually want and what they actually need, it can really help guide these employers in creating different policies and incentives for keeping their working family caregivers in the workplace. So first is flexibility, and we've talked a little bit about this already, but more employers are recognizing that a flexible work arrangement and paid leave for elder caregiving can serve as a powerful recruiting and retention tool and then will also position them as an employer of choice. So again, that example of Deloitte. They're getting lots of buzz and attention, and if I were a working family caregiver and I had the skill set to work at Deloitte, it would make me, want to work there too. So again, it can be a powerful recruiting and, more importantly, retention tool. Paid time off for caregiving, expanding paid time off programs. In recent years, some companies have gone as far as offering unlimited paid time off so that caregivers can really adjust their work schedules as needed to accommodate their caregiving duties. They really are seeking out expert information. Many organizations are starting to offer employees a combination of information resources, referral services, and advice. Maybe it's by phone, maybe it's online, maybe it's through their Employee Assistance Program, their EAP program, or possibly they have an internal portal where their Human Resources Department is offering different expert information or tools. Maybe it's a hotline, maybe it's care consultations, that sort of thing. But caregivers are really hungry for that information. And information is power. So if we can provide that to them, it can help them make better choices as they go about their caregiving role. Some employers are starting to offer workshops or webinars. Maybe it's a lunch and learn where they bring in a local expert to provide information and resources to those employees. They also might be offering these workshops and webinars to bring together the caregivers in their organization so that they can share ideas, share advice with one another, kind of create a little bit of a support group. Some companies are offering legal and or financial advice. They might have limited legal consultations that are available annually that will help them prepare wills, healthcare directives, financial power of attorneys, those types of things, those documents that caregivers really need to provide care and to have all of their older adult loved ones' affairs in order as they go about their caregiving duties. And there are a few more of these wants and needs on the next slide. Some companies might be offering on-site support. Again, maybe there's an independent elder care consult that can happen on site or a go-to expert that can help ease the burden of researching and vetting out support services, which obviously can be stressful and time-consuming, and employees are hoping that their employees aren't Google searching assisted living or home care during work hours. Having these on-site support individuals can really help provide those resources to them. And then also some intangible things that these caregivers are wanting come with the company culture. And we know culture is so important. It's kind of a buzzword in different companies. So through training, role modeling, organizations can create a safe environment in which people can speak honestly with their supervisors, with their coworkers about their caregiving role. So again, that can come about through kind of a cultural change. Leaders in the organization, if there's a leader that's providing care, they can kind of step up and say, this is impacting me. We want to be supportive of you and your roles. Making employees know that it's a safe environment to talk about, again, their caregiving roles and stressors. And then those care consultations, I've talked a little bit about that, offering free consultations with a gerontologist or geriatric care manager to help these caregivers develop a plan. And this could be that the organization has a consultation with a gerontologist that really helps them organize kind of a company-wide plan, or it can be meeting kind of one-on-one with employees that are needing it. Another growing area, one that's becoming more popular, is companies offer emergency backup care. And this could be provided maybe with a small copay as part of their employee benefits package, or offered through another company that they work with. So let's say the caregiver gets up and finds out that mom or dad is sick that day, or maybe their regular caregiver that they use isn't showing up, or their sister who was supposed to come to town to take care of mom got stuck at the airport. They need backup care in an emergency situation. Companies are stepping up to help make that backup care possible so that their employees can still make it to work and be productive in the workplace, so they're not worried about what's happening at home. And then finally, caregiver support groups or networks. Employers can offer these types of support groups as an outlet to discuss their stressful situations and their caregiving roles. And they can ask other caregivers for guidance. And then they can also provide, a certain counseling space or an area of the office where groups can meet, share information, share resources. Maybe it's also an online portal where employees can log in, share resources, and that sort of thing, especially for some of those organizations that are more global, or if their employees are working from home, kind of an online support group support system. So again, these are all some things that caregivers are expressing that they want and that they need from their employers. And it's also, not only is it important for employers to be aware of these wants and needs, but they also should be aware of some of the signs that an employee might be struggling with their caregiving duties and needing support. So let's talk about those signs on this next slide. So really there are 5 signs that we as employers, as fellow employees, can be looking out for that really puts these working caregivers at risk. So the first is stress and depression. So if an employer is observing stress and depression in their employee, it might be due to their elder caregiving. And one of the best ways to help that individual is to connect them with the company's EAP, Employee Assistance Program resources, or ask the Human Resources Department to help that individual get the resources that they need. It also, the stresses of caregiving can also make the individual vulnerable to illnesses. So caregivers are working around the clock, not only at their jobs, but they have that part-time role of caregiving for their loved ones. They're making sure their loved ones getting to the doctor, making sure their loved ones prescriptions are refilled, but sometimes they fail to take care of their own health, and ultimately this can cost the employer in terms of healthcare costs. So many working caregivers report that these responsibilities in their caregiving role makes it harder to take care of themselves. So employers can offer opportunities for caregivers, working caregivers, to regularly get to those doctor's appointments. Maybe they have a company wellness program that their employees can enroll in, and that employers can encourage them to get involved with. So in order to continue to provide care to their loved one, in order to continue working and being productive, employers should be conscious of the fact that their employees' health and well-being needs to be up to speed. So again, creating those opportunities where they can maybe take a long lunch to go to their own doctor appointment, that sort of thing can really go a long way. Another sign is fatigue. So while employees' sleep schedules can't be controlled, employers should recognize that fatigue is a common challenge that many family caregivers are facing. So they should be modeling healthy habits, encouraging employees to maintain a good sleep schedule, and maybe they can even consider if a caregiver was up with their older adult loved one in the ER until 4 a.m., maybe granting them the opportunity to come in a few hours late to catch up on sleep. Again, that flexible work schedule can be really helpful in reducing that fatigue that working family caregiver might be experiencing. And then the final sign is guilt. The feeling of guilt is very common among caregivers. They may feel guilty that they're spread too thin. It might cause frustration. They might be feeling those competing demands that we talked about earlier. Their work is pulling them one way, their parents pulling them another way, their family members, their kids, their spouse pulling them in another direction. And they might feel guilty that they're underperforming at work or not able to give it 100%, or feeling guilty that they're not able to be at that doctor's appointment with their loved one because they have to be at work, because they need financially to continue working to make sure that their loved one's care needs are met. So when employers are seeing signs of guilt, they need to provide a safe environment where these caregivers can share their challenges, and then they can work with them to develop a plan to better cope with these stresses or provide them resources that can help them cope. So these, again, are just 5 signs that employers can be looking out for and take notice of when it comes to their working family caregivers. And I recognize that talking about these issues in the workplace for an employee to talk about their caregiving issues in the workplace might be intimidating. Family caregivers might shy away from talking about it because they might be afraid of that stigma that comes along with elder caregiving. But communication can be key when working with employers and employees to find, again, that good work-life balance. So I did want to share a few communication tips on the next slide. And employers may feel that their employees' personal lives are really just that, private, but if their staff member is a family caregiver, it could be helpful to know what they're facing and what they're up against in their caregiving role. And employers will never know if they don't ask. And the following tips come from REACT and AARP, and they offer up these tips as a way to create a supportive environment with open communication. So the first communication tip is straight talk. Employers can really start by simply opening the door to conversation, and they can do so by reframing the conversation. So they could add in questions during an employee evaluation or a one-on-one meeting that discusses their responsibilities outside of the office. Many caregivers, again, don't identify themselves as caregivers. So instead of asking, "Are you a family caregiver for your loved one?" they might say, "No," because they don't identify as a family caregiver. But if you start to ask them, what are your roles and responsibilities outside of the office? This could help the employer realize if the employee says, "Oh, well, I really every night I have to stop by my mom or dad's house to make sure that he or she has a good meal and takes his medications." That could be a clue to the employer that this individual is indeed a family caregiver. So by asking these types of questions, the employer is not only opening up the avenues to help them, but it's helping the caregiver themselves recognize that they are in fact a caregiver. And then the next step they can refer them on to maybe their EAP program, their human resources program, the resources that they provide as an organization to help family caregivers, or possibly talk about, is there an option for a flexible work schedule, those types of conversations. And then finally, create an open door policy. Employers should let their employees know that they're always there for them to talk about their needs. This type of support really could increase employee productivity and the commitment, the loyalty to the organization. And some caregivers simply won't want to talk about it, and we really can't change that, but having that open door policy, letting employees know these EAP program benefits are available to you, or our Human Resources Department is available if you are needing assistance. They might not take advantage of it now, but down the road they certainly could. And these tips and a lot of other tips and resources can be found on the Daughters in the Workplace website. And there's even a quiz on there. I just wanted to show you a quick snapshot of that. So working family caregivers can get on to daughterintheworkplace.com and take a quiz. It's entitled, Can You Take Time Off Work to Care for Your Mom? And it really helps assess whether or not caregivers understand the policies, the benefits that are available to them. And as you can see, that first question says, I can use the FMLA, Family and Medical Leave Act, to care for my mother-in-law. True or false? So this quiz works through a variety of caregiving topics, and it offers up resources at the end that can be extremely helpful to these working family caregivers. So some additional resources for employers on this site include caregiver-friendly business practices. So I did want to touch on that quickly before I go to the additional resources. And these business practices are ways for employers to help their employees who are serving as a family caregiver. And again, these business practices help employers, at the core, these business practices help employers demonstrate compassion, respect, and support for these family caregivers who are working for them. So through our Daughters in the Workplace campaign, Home Instead Senior Care has encouraged employers to really embrace these principles and to integrate them into their organizations. And it's important that these family caregivers do not feel alone. And research has revealed that most working caregivers are not very satisfied with their company's work-family policies. So some best practices that companies can start to implement is first to empower employees to ask for what they need. This guilt that we've been talking about often prevents an employee from asking in the first place, and sometimes employers lose good employees when they quit because they think there's no other option. So rather than going to their employer to talk through the options, they just quit their job. So if we can empower these employees, let them know that our door is always open for those conversations, it can, again, create a caregiver-friendly environment. Having a policy to be flexible and human when needed. We've seen companies fall back on the, oh, but our policy states, ... And we really want to kind of change that mindset. We need to ensure that managers are trained on which policies really do need to be set in stone, and then which policies can be a little bit flexible. Encourage managers to think creatively for solutions that work both for the employer and for the employee. Pardon me. And then employers should consider a backup plan. Employees can't always give that heads up when a crisis is about to occur, especially when it comes to caring for an older parent or loved one. So if employers have a backup assistance at the ready, it can help ease this caregiving situation. So large companies have already been making this happen with maternity leave, but can they apply these same types of principles to backfill as needed? And for smaller companies, can they cross-train employees on the basics that will help go a long way in filling in when those employees do need to leave for family emergencies? And then to offer up support. We've been talking a lot about this. So for large businesses, it could be that EAP program that helps them find home care, assisted living, hospice resources. For a small business, it might just simply be a list of local providers or links to websites with resources. But for all businesses, this can simply be listening and connecting employees together that might have similar experiences so that they can share their personal situations. and learn from one another. And then finally, respecting the caregiver's needs. Giving care to a parent, we should be giving that the same weight as the care that we're giving to our children. So including caregiving in the language that we're using to outline our family leave policies can really go a long way in these organizations. And then if we can offer as businesses the same flexibility to those that are elder caregiving as those that we give to parents of small children, that can be extremely meaningful and impactful and helpful in caregivers maintaining that work-life balance. So at the end of the day, the impacts of caregiving on employees will not go away anytime soon. We've seen the stats. We've surveyed the caregivers. We've seen the productivity loss that businesses are facing. However, employers and employees can really be proactive in helping to create a caregiver-friendly business environment. And so I did want to leave you, I have lots of resources, but I know we're nearing the end. I did want to point out just a couple here on the next slide. So Help for Working Family Caregivers is a great resource. It is kind of an addition to an EAP program or a benefit that employers can offer their employees, all family caregiver-centered tools. And then REACT, Respect a Caregiver's Time. This is a great resource. It's an employer-focused coalition that's really dedicated to addressing the challenges faced by employee caregivers and reducing the impact on the companies that employ them. So again, a great resource, and their website is respectcaregivers.org, or you can do a quick Google search. The Society for Human Resource Management, or SHRM, they're really elevating this issue and have some good resources. And then on the next slide, I wanted to share with you some great studies, again, at daughtersintheworkplace.com, where you can find the results of our survey, where you can send people to take that quiz. And then SHRM has done a great study, and there's a few others there that you can refer to if you want to learn more on this topic. But with that, I want to thank you for tuning in today, because this is such an important topic. We're finding more caregivers in the workplace, and it's going to continue to grow and be a more prevalent issue. And it's really taking kind of the policymakers in our country by storm. We have some great advocacy groups that are working. I know even today, I think, they're up on Capitol Hill talking to lawmakers about FMLA, and can it be expanded to really focus on family caregivers, because we know that it's such a growing issue. So with that, Steve, I'll hand it back over to you to give me some questions.
All right, great. Thanks a lot, Lakeland. A lot of great information, as always. And yes, everyone, it is time for the Q&A portion, so send in your questions here for Lakeland, and we'll get to them here. First question here, Lakeland, what recourse does a caregiver have if an employer lays off an employee due to the demands of a caregiver role, even if the paid time off was not maximized?
You know, that is a really good question. I think it really comes down to the policies of the organization. A lot of times when you come sign up, or pardon me, sign your job agreement for your job, there are certain policies that are outlined, and some companies have policies around their reasons for why they can let you go or not. So it's really situational, and I'm not overly familiar with the repercussions or the legal action that can be taken. I would refer you to the REACT website. They have some great resources on there.
Okay, great. Next question here. Lakeland, the question is, I think that one of the barriers for linking older adults with home health care and similar services is insurance and cost. Do you have any comments regarding this or programs that may help with the financial angle of this situation?
Yeah, of course. Cost is always something that can be a barrier for, and a lot of times it's a very common reason why people leave the workforce, so that they can stay home and take care of their loved ones. So some companies are creating policies where they, again, will pay for long-term or pay for home care or provide maybe a copay or a stipend for emergency type situations. Some companies do offer some long-term care type benefits. But in terms of resources, your local area agency on aging is always a great resource to reach out to. If the individual has Alzheimer's or dementia, a lot of times there are grants out there. There's Hilarity for Charity. The Alzheimer's Association has care grants. And so when it comes to the cost of care, yes, you're right, that can definitely be a barrier. And I think that, again, policies out there that I know that there's one where they're looking at so the health savings account that most employees have, where they can put money away for their health care needs, and they can draw out money to pay for prescriptions or doctor's visits. There's some legislative proposals out there that are looking at, can we make those HSA dollars available to pay for, elder caregiving in terms of home care or medical needs of the elder that maybe that individual can't pay for themselves. So there is groups out there that are advocating for these types of advancements. Some great groups to follow are Caregiver Action Network and the National Alliance for Caregiving. These are two groups that are constantly advocating in the best interest of family caregivers, whether they're working, not working. They also, span all ages. So whether you're caring for a child with a disability or, elder caregiving, they're very supportive. So while there's not an awesome answer for that question just yet, I think, again, this topic is gaining a lot of speed at, the national level. People are talking more about it. Employers are stepping up and saying, this is how we will help. So I wish I had a better answer to that, but I think we're moving in the right direction.
Okay, great. We've had a few people who have asked about the resources slides. Everyone, the resources are on the slides. If you want to download them via the tab to the left there, resources slides are here. They will also be sent to you later on today in the follow-up email. So the resources will be available to you on those slides. Back to the questions here, Lakeland. Question is, as a mental health therapist focusing on elder care and individuals' life-changing illnesses, do you have any ideas how I can reach out to caregivers who do not have EAP benefits? Many stressed caregivers know they are stressed, but do not always reach out for help for themselves as they feel obligated to take care of everyone else first.
That is a great point. Yes, a lot of times these caregivers are juggling so many roles and responsibilities that they fail to reach out themselves. And it can be difficult to reach those caregivers that don't know, that there are resources out there, that they don't have an EAP program. One way could be through word of mouth, through faith-based communities. There's some outreach that can be done in that environment. Without it's hard because every caregiver is in a very different situation. So to say that there's one ideal way to reach out, it's hard to kind of pinpoint that ideal way. If you are, in your local community, if you offer resources, like your counseling resources, and want to reach out, sometimes Facebook is a great way to connect, because a lot of times caregivers are searching online, especially in a digital age. They're looking for tips and resources, and it could be at 2 or 3 in the morning on their computer. So if there's a way to develop a social media campaign in your community just to bring awareness to the different resources that are available, that's a great way to go about it. Or reaching out to companies in your community. Again, I'm not sure where you're from or how large of a community it is, but the local chamber of commerce, those types of things, those can be great places to start.
Okay. Well, Lakeland, unfortunately, we have reached the end of our hour here, and we're just about out of time, but I want to thank you for another great presentation and for being here with us today. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.